The fertiliser commodity market is differentiated now between what's happening on nitrogen and what's happening in terms of phosphate. So if we look at the nitrogen side first, making urea is dependent on a gas price primarily. In the past, that has been linked to a barrel of oil price, but that linkage has broken in more recent times. Looking across the world, there's a lot of capacity coming on stream for making urea, and the demand side, particularly from big markets such as Brazil and India, has eased off, as those markets in turn are not receiving as much money for their own commodity exports. So in nitrogen, we find ourselves in a situation where strong supply, modest to weakening demand, which has resulted in the price of urea coming down. I'm not convinced we're at the bottom. We're close, but I don't think we're at the bottom. So over the next 12 months, I would be anticipating urea price will continue to soften slowly and then ultimately stabilise. On the phosphate side, the prices have held up reasonably strongly. There's nowhere near the same oversupply on demand, on supply side, and there's nowhere near the big drop-off on the demand side. So for phosphate, whether that's superphosphate or DAP or any phosphate derivative, we may see modest easing over the next 12 months, but nowhere near the collapse that has happened on the nitrogen side. So really, it's a game of two halves, and it does depend on what happens in the demand for food worldwide, particularly in the big export markets such as Brazil and to a certain extent India. If the commodity prices they receive for their food exports is high, then I think you'll see quite a rapid turnaround in the nitrogen market and a strengthening back in the phosphate market.
What about potash and sulphur?
Potash and sulphur are a little bit different from nitrogen and phosphate. Much smaller markets, much less commodity trading into those particular areas, and much more tightly controlled. Potash, really there are 2 or 3 significant suppliers, and although those prices have softened, you don't have hundreds of at-scale suppliers. So I don't think we'll see much movement on the potash side. On the sulphur side, a similar occurrence, really not a huge traded market as sulphur per se, and limited number of suppliers. So I don't think we'll see such massive swings on sulphur, but the trend on sulphur would be a slight softening.